When a man begins to awaken his inner consciousness, he naturally moves away from the crowds, not because they hate people, but because the usual forms of connection stop making sense. Most conversations revolve around social appearances, empty gossip or constant lamentations, and once he begins to see through these masks, it is harder to participate genuinely. He is not bitter. It is not isolated by pride or superiority. It simply stopped pursuing what others still persecute desperately. It begins to perceive theatricality in everyday interactions, this compulsive need to be accepted, of belonging at any cost, always saying exactly what others want to hear, and without boasting about it, he silently withdraws. People can still wave. They can still offer superficial conversations, but the real connection no longer exists because it has never really existed from the beginning. He did not cut ties deliberately. It did not burn bridges for grudge. It simply stopped pretending to be who is not, and when he does this, the distance happens naturally. This is the beginning of true solitude, not loneliness, only the necessary space between who he used to be and who is becoming. He begins to see clearly that what keeps people together is not real. It is not genuine depth. It is not authentic truth. They are only comfortable habits, social convenience, and shared illusions. People connect, complaining about jobs, pursuing superficial status, defending ideas that have never truly questioned. He used to do the same. I thought this was real connection, but now it sounds more like meaningless noise. He notices how often people speak only to avoid uncomfortable silence, how much energy is wasted by maintaining false appearances. This constant need for external validation, forced agreement, emotional reassurance. And since he doesn't need these things for himself anymore, he clearly sees how others are dependent on them. Since relationships often survive not because of honesty, but because everyone agrees to keep the scam working, he understands why people cling to what seems familiar. It still cares genuinely, still listens carefully, but no longer participates in the social game. This change, subtle as it can be, creates distance by itself. Outside, it may seem the same as always. Still appears when necessary. It is still polite and respectful. It did not completely disappear from social life, but something fundamental changed internally, and the people around you can feel it, even if they can't name exactly what it is. They realize that he is no longer trying to impress anyone. If you are understanding this deep transformation that I am describing, leave your like in this video and subscribe to the channel. This interior awakening journey is something that needs to be shared with more people. That he is no longer seeking approval desperately, that he is no longer playing the traditional social game. Some find this admirable and inspiring. Others find disturbing and threatening, because it is no longer easier to read, because it is no longer performing to anyone. It does not artificially flatter. It does not compete for attention, does not entertain by obligation, and this makes it difficult to categorize socially. People can say that he is too far, or very quiet, or that he has changed completely. What you really mean is that he no longer fits the social roles that they got used to seeing. They liked him more when he reflected their values without questioning. Now it reflects something different, something more solid and independent, not dependent on being accepted by everyone. People see him physically, but they do not truly know him, because knowing him would now require them to see what he sees. And most people are not prepared for this revelation. He once believed that remaining connected meant being always involved, always appearing, participating in all conversations, maintaining all the expected social appearances. But over time, this definition has completely changed. As his priorities turned inside, he stopped engaging by social obligation, not because it cares less about people, but because it no longer needs others to claim their place in the world. It still values genuine connection, but not if it depends on constant engagement, emotional performance, or subtle negotiation for external approval. It does not retire by resentment or hurt. It simply no longer finds value in maintaining relationships built on pretense or unrealistic expectations. For those used to transactional connection, your presence may seem distant and cold, but in fact, he is just no longer playing the same social role as before. He no longer speaks only to maintain artificial peace. You no longer see yourself through the eyes of other people. What emerges in this space is not loneliness, but crystal clear. A calm independence that allows him to remain rooted even when others come and go from his life. He has become honest with himself, and this honesty, a deeper kind of freedom, begins to take shape. On the outside, solitude is often misunderstood by society. For most people, being alone signals lack of friends, lack of purpose, lack of social belonging. But for a man who began to clearly see reality, solitude becomes something completely different. He no longer fills his time with empty distractions just to avoid being alone with himself. It no longer seeks constant company to escape inner discomfort. He learned to sit in silence without having to end quickly. What others describe how loneliness is often only non-familiar stillness. They equate the absence of noise with existential emptiness. He realized that most of what he feels in a typical day, conversations, tasks and duties, is just noise pretending to be important. In solitude, he finds himself without distortion or social filters. There is no one to impress, no image to maintain, and this clarity, though uncomfortable at first, becomes a source of inner strength. It does not avoid people, but it no longer depends on them to feel complete as a human being. This change usually confuses others deeply. They assume that he must be withdrawn, disconnected, or even arrogant, but in fact, he is simply happy with his own presence. He faced the silence that most people run away desperately, and found that it was not silence at all. It was true peace. As it becomes more stable inwardly, it becomes less predictable for others, not by manipulative intention, but simply by the fact that it no longer participates in the subtle exchanges that define most of the conventional social interaction. He does not mirror emotions to gain approval. It offers no reassurance when it would mean denying what you really see. For those still dependent on external validation, this creates genuine discomfort. They can interpret their neutrality as arrogance, their silence as judgment, their detachment as total disinterest. In fact, he is nothing like that. He is simply no longer invested in managing his perception of him. Much of what people call connection is actually an elaborate performance, a mutual agreement to keep certain illusions intact and working. Once he leaves this social arrangement, he interrupts him only for being present authentically. He does not discuss aggressively or tease or try to convert anyone to his worldview, but the absence of family signs, automatic approval, mutual flattery, constant emotional reinforcement, leaves others restless and uncomfortable. Many of their previous friendships begin to disappear gradually, not because of direct conflict, but because the foundation on which they supported themselves no longer sustained. It begins to notice how often relationships are maintained through shared complaints, empty routine habits, or the mutual reinforcement of limiting personal narratives. Since it no longer participates in these automatic standards, the connection weakens naturally. He is no longer compelled to offer agreement just by belonging to a group, no more conversations that avoid real substance, and has no interest in maintaining ties that require them to decrease as a person. This change is not a rejection of people. It is the result of a change in what he is willing to invest his precious energy. True friendship becomes something quieter, simpler, and much rarer. It is no longer based on shared illusions, but in genuine mutual recognition. To people who don't need each other, but choose to walk side by side without unrealistic expectations, these types of connections cannot be artificially manufactured. They emerge naturally, if they emerge, and only when both individuals stopped being completed by the other. Most social interaction depends on universally understood rules. You validate my perspective, I validate yours. We are not going to be very deep on important issues. Let's not challenge each other's assumptions. Let's pretend we agree, even when we disagree fundamentally. He used to follow these rules because everyone went automatically. But once he begins to operate outside them, social dynamics begins to break visibly. It offers no more comfort, just to relieve social tension. Do not pretend to agree when you genuinely disagree. He ended with the small theatrical acts that keep everyone else feeling safe, but keep him feeling false. Here, I want to take a break and ask for your participation. If this message is resonating with you, leave a comment with the word awakening and tell when you realized you needed to stop pretending to be who wasn't. I want to read your experience. This is not a social challenge. It is pure clarity. And this clarity is disruptive because it exposes how much of everyday life is based on mutual avoidance of uncomfortable truth. People even notice that they do not consciously understand what has changed. They feel the transformation. They realize that something familiar has completely disappeared. The constant exchange of artificial comfort, automatic validation, and perpetual distraction. And without it feeding the social system, the system weakens naturally. The conversations begin to look strange and forced. People stop looking for it so often. What used to look warm and familiar now seems tense and uncomfortable. Not because he did something wrong or offensive, but because he stopped participating in the established social game. He did not reject anyone personally. It simply stopped reinforcing a structure in which it no longer believes. As your understanding is deepened, something unexpected happens gradually. He begins to need fewer things, not only materially, but emotionally, socially, even intellectually. No longer seeks external recognition. It no longer depends on others to confirm what you already know internally. And as this need is dissolved, many relationships that once required it to work also dissolve. This is the fascinating paradox. The clearer it becomes, the silent your life becomes. Not because he is emotionally closed, but because much of what once filled his time was rooted in a search for constant external statement. Without this desperate search, most social activity seems optional, when not unnecessary. He stops trying to be understood by everyone. Stop having to explain your choices constantly. No longer measures your presence for how much space occupies in other people's lives. Outside, this may seem too social retreat, but internally is the opposite, an establishment in something solid and real. It still values genuine connection, but only when it emerges naturally, without demand or forced performance. He did not become cold or insensitive. It is simply no longer emotionally dependent. And in this healthy detachment, there is a kind of depth that cannot be found through desperate attachment. Since he awakens to reality, he can no longer see what he clearly sees. He looks inside, and the mental noise calms down. He looks out, and the world is still dormant, unconsciously. He sees the false certainty in people's eyes, the roles they play automatically, the beliefs that never truly question, the constant movement that masks an inner stillness they have never touched. He no longer envies what others call connection, because he completely understands the real cost. Often requires forced agreement, constant emotional performance, social conformity, and it will not exchange truth for the comfort of fitting perfectly. Still, there is a part of it that remembers what it was before, a part that silently expects, not by crowds, not by surface company, but for someone awakened, someone who saw what he saw, felt what he felt. Someone who doesn't need him to be smaller, quiet, or more pleasant to feel emotionally safe. This kind of meeting is extremely rare. It cannot be artificially forced, and he prefers to wait in silence than to pretend empty conversation. So he walks alone, not because he likes to be separated from people, but because, in a world still dreaming collectively, authenticity is more valuable than social acceptance. At some point in this journey, the solitude stops seeming unusual or problematic. It becomes normal, not empty, just silent and peaceful. He no longer interprets the distance as a problem to be solved desperately. He sees her for what he really is, the natural result of no longer pretending to be someone else. While others surround themselves with constant noise, he learned to live in stillness. While many pursue attention desperately, he moves without asking to be seen or validated. People often assume that he should feel lonely, as company, any company, was always better than walking alone consciously. But they confuse isolation with absence of purpose. He is not absent from life. He is just no longer performing to others. He came to prefer the space that honesty creates on the proximity that illusion demands artificially. This is the final and definitive change. He doesn't need the world to wake up to feel complete. You don't need agreement to feel clear mentally. And you don't need validation to know who it really is. Before I finish, I want to ask for 3 important things. First, subscribe to this channel to continue receiving content on consciousness development. Second, save this video and listen again in 7 days. I guarantee you will notice insights that have gone unnoticed today. And third, share it with someone who needs to hear this message. Sometimes a person needs to know that he is not alone on this journey of awakening. He walks alone, yes, but not as an outsider rejected by society, like a man at peace with the cost of truth. And this peace, this clarity, this authenticity, this is what Ralph Waldo Emerson called genuine self-confidence. The courage to be who you really are, even if it means walking alone for a while.